Jason Antos.
So, I want to welcome everybody here tonight. I'm not used to using the microphone, so I'm going to talk without it. If anybody has trouble hearing me, go to the mic. So, my name, to introduce myself, I'm Jason Antos. I'm an author of this book on the history of Whitestone. I've lived in this town my entire life, 31 years. My family also grew up in this town as well. My last name, as you know, is Antos, but it was shortened from Antonopoulos. My middle initial is D for Dimitri, that was my grandfather's name. And Jason is kind of a Greek-American neutral name. Jason, Yashina, you can go either way. So, the name Antonopoulos originates, as you know, from Peloponnesus. That's where my great-great-grandfather came from. Then they went to Kerkyra, and from there they went to a small island north of Corfu called Othoni, close to Albania. It's the last territory in the northwest section of Greece. 100 year-round residents, 6 miles in diameter, no hospital, no police, no fire department, but very nice, very beautiful. So, I'm going to talk, so that's a little bit about my history. So to talk tonight, I'm going to show you some slides of the history of Whitestone. We're going to discuss some of the changes that have occurred in our neighborhood, the historical importance of our neighborhood, the importance that it's had on the city of New York, on the state of New York, and the country at large. So to begin with, Whitestone, which as you know is part of Queens, which is part of the 5 boroughs of New York City, was all farmland hundreds of years ago. In the 1600s, in the mid-1600s, New York was settled by the Dutch, and it was called New Netherland. Manhattan, which was the seat of power, was New Amsterdam. And all of the territories that are now Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens, Staten Island, were all part of the domain. In the 1680s, the English took over the land, and they renamed the territory in honor of the Duke of York, and they called it New York. And all of the territories that are now the 5 boroughs were turned into what's known as ridings or shires, which is how property is divided up and townships are divided up in the English fashion. So then, throughout the 1700s, of course, came the Revolution. Queens was on the side of the British. Flushing was the main seat of power for the British Army during the Revolution. They were very anti-separation from England. But then, of course, and we have a famous resident of Whitestone, Francis Lewis, who is the namesake of Francis Lewis Boulevard, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. We'll talk about that in a little bit further in the show. So, to begin with, Whitestone was first settled in the mid-1600s. The only inhabitants of the area were the Native Americans. The Native Americans that lived here were known as the Matinecock Indians. Now, in history teaches us that there were 13 tribes of Long Island. This is not exactly true. For many years, people believed that the names of the natives were the name of their people, of their culture, of their race. But that's not true. They were all part of the Algonquin nation. And their names were not to describe who they were, but where they were from. So, for example, you have the town of Maspeth, near Glendale, here in Queens. That town is named after the Maspeth Indians. Maspeth is Native American for the place of dirty water. So, if they would meet, and Matinecock, which were the Native Americans here in North Queens, Flushing, Whitestone, Bayside, Matinecock means place of the rolling hills. Okay? So, if one group would meet another group on a trail, they would say, who are you? We are the Matinecock, the people of the rolling hill country. Who are you? We're coming from the place of filthy water. Okay, that's how they communicated. And then, of course, we have other Native American names. We have Jamaica Queens, after the Yamaco Indians. We have the Rockaways, after the Rekowaki Native Americans. So the first settlers who came here purchased Whitestone from the Native Americans. The natives did not deal in currency, they dealt in trade goods. So, as the natives were, the first people to settle the area were Dutch, they were very slick, and they traded the Native Americans in exchange for the land that now constitutes Whitestone and Greater Flushing. They traded, for every 50 acres, they gave the natives one little axe. So for every 50 acres, the Native Americans got an axe. And ironically, 20 years later, on a homestead, on a farm, which is now the present-day location of LaGuardia Airport, there was an Indian war, and one of the founders of Whitestone was actually killed with one of those very axes that they traded in exchange for the property. So, from the 1650s through the Revolution in the 1700s, all the way through the 1800s, Whitestone was dominantly, or actually exclusively, farmland. You're dealing with only a few families, maybe 100 people. And this went on for more than a century. Then finally, in the 1890s, as time marched on, and the modern era was coming into the fray with trains, the advent of the automobile, air flight was still in its infancy. So what happens is the city begins to explode population-wise. The most populated part of New York was Manhattan and Brooklyn. Everywhere else was all farms. So naturally the population began to expand into the open areas because Manhattan and Brooklyn was too full. So they wanted to go elsewhere. So politicians started pushing for what was known as the Great Consolidation of New York City, the creation of the 5 boroughs. Because before 1898, all of the boroughs, with the exception of Manhattan and Brooklyn, were not part of New York City. They were their own independent counties. That's why we call it Queens County, we call Brooklyn Kings County, all right? They were their own independent counties with their own independent form of government. They had their own police department, their own fire department, the same way like you have in Nassau County and in Suffolk County. Each neighborhood has their own fire and police and all this. That was exactly how it was here until 1898. There was no such thing as Nassau County. Nassau County began in 1899, and all of the neighborhoods in Nassau County from the 1600s until 1899 were part of Queens. So when you read old documents, you see things like Roslyn, Queens, Glen Cove, Queens, Great Neck, Queens, and things like this. So, to begin, so Whitestone was, as I mentioned, dominantly farmland, but as the 1800s came, it became known for industry. The 3 types of industry that we had, or the 2 types of industry that we had here, one was shipping, of course, because we're right by the water, we're right by where the Flushing Bay feeds into the Long Island Sound. So we had, as you see in this photograph here, for example, is an advertisement for the Grand Moonlight Excursion up the Sound, stopping at College Point and Whitestone and City Island. So these were things that used to occur here. There were people who chartered boats. They would have parties on these boats. They would take large groups of people from Manhattan and Brooklyn to come to Whitestone to go on picnicking excursions and have clam bakes and things like this. So this was a very popular type of industry here because it was such a pristine area. Farmland, beautiful beaches, nice beaches, and people would come here to go swimming and relax. The other industry that we had here was by a businessman by the name of John Locke, who owned a tin factory. So Whitestone was known for its tin and copperware. And right where the Wallbound Shopping Center is, there was a huge deposit of clay. So Whitestone in the 1700s, the first industry was things made out of clay, pottery, cups, pipes, smoking for tobacco. So clay was the first big industry in Whitestone. So, there's a bird's eye view of our neighborhood. As you can see, it looks quite different. This is a picture from 1900. And it really just shows you how open everything was. This is actually 14th Avenue. Okay? No cross island, nothing. It's all open farmland with just a few homes. And then in 1906 is when the big population boom began. So, but before I touch on that, here's a great rare photo. This is from a postcard. This is the White Stone. Okay, so the namesake of our town comes from this beautiful boulder to the right. We'll do a close-up here. Okay, so this boulder, excuse me, was down by where the Whitestone Bridge is today. Okay, and when the first settlers, the Dutch, they came here in the 1650s, they saw this beautiful, flat, sandy beach, all right, all along the coastline. But in the middle was this large boulder, white boulder, and the sun was reflecting off of it. So they saw it as a beacon, drawing them in. And they counted this as a good omen, a good sign that this was a good place to land and settle. So they called it Whitestone. And the first mention of Whitestone, the word Whitestone is actually two words. Okay, and then as time went on, they just said Whitestone, and they made it into one. So this is also, the stone was there until the 30s after the building of the Whitestone Bridge, and it was there through the 40s and 50s before the coastline was altered, and this was destroyed. So the namesake for our town was obliterated. But locals who used to hang out on this rock, like this couple is here, this area became known as Hell's Bells, because couples would sit on top of the rock, they would lose track of the time, and the tide would come in, and they would be stranded at the top of the rock, and between the rock and the shoreline, and they would say, Hell's Bells. And that was it. They had to wait out there for the tide to recede. This is a great shot of Beechhurst. So in 1906, the first population boom in Whitestone begins. Beechhurst was known as Whitestone Landing. Whitestone Landing. In 06, the Shore Acres Realty Company came to town, saw the beautiful farmland that consisted of Whitestone Landing, and said this would be a perfect place for our new community, our new development. So they created the town of Beechhurst. The term Beechhurst obviously comes from the abundance of beech trees that was found in the area, so they called it Beechhurst. There's really no big historical significance to the name other than it's just a marketing decision, because Beechhurst sounds more fancy than Whitestone Landing. Whitestone Landing sounds kind of industrial and it's not that attractive, so they made it Beechhurst. This is looking actually from, what's the name of the new Italian restaurant off of Palace Cove? Right next to the
Pointy?
point.
Which
Duponte.
Duponte.
Okay, so this is taken from Duponte's driveway, looking up towards Powell's Cove, which crosses the scene from left to right, and those are the construction of the first homes. And you see, there's all this open land with the few homes, and as you can see, you can't tell now because there's so many homes and so much development, but here you see those rolling hills. You see how the Metenacog were from the people from the hilly country, so you can still see the hills down by the water, and how this land was not flat, but it was, you know. So, in 1906, Beechhurst was developed. This is an old photo going back before the development. Now we're just backtracking a little bit. Now we're into the 1880s. So, this is one of the typical farms that you would find here in Whitestone. This is the Smith Homestead. The Smith Homestead they were one of the biggest landowners in Whitestone, and then after it was the Smith estate, it became the Powell's estate. That's why we have Powell's Cove. So this is the Powell home, okay? This is in the, excuse me, this is from the 1880s. This is before Queens was a borough of New York City, and this home was located in the pathway of the Cross Island Parkway. So the next time you're driving on the Cross Island and you approach the split between, off of the Whitestone, excuse me, and you approach the split between Cross Island to the left and Whitestone to the right, you're driving right through the center of this home, okay, just to show you. So this is a familiar scene. So as time moved on and we moved out of the farmland phase, Whitestone became developed. This is an image from 1912, and this is showing the first trolley to enter Whitestone. This is 8th Avenue, but years ago, when it was 8th Avenue, all the towns in Queens, as it was in the rest of the city, each neighborhood, because it wasn't consolidated into the city yet, each neighborhood had their own street system. So 8th Avenue in Whitestone was different from 8th Avenue in College Point, 8th Avenue in Bayside, or anywhere else. What happened? Oh, the point? Okay. Thank you. So we're looking at 8th Avenue, and I'm sure you're wondering, well, 8th Avenue really doesn't look this way. There aren't any shops on 8th Avenue. That's because in the 1920s, 8th Avenue was renamed 150th Street. So this is looking towards 150th and 14th Avenue. Over here is Harpel, the drugstore. Okay? If the cameraman was to turn around, he would be facing the Cross Island Parkway with the post office on the right. Okay? So this is the trolley entering Whitestone for the first time in August of 1912. The trolley was part of the Queens County Rail Corporation. Trolleys from the Queens County Rail Corporation went all over the borough. The main hub was at the intersection of Northern Boulevard and Woodside Avenue, where there was the main trolley barn, which is still there today. There's a shopping center there called the Tower Shopping Center, and those trolley barns, which house the waiting room and the dispatch center for the trolley, still stands there till this very day. The trolleys in Whitestone only lasted about 20 years. They weren't really that profitable, and they weren't very popular until the end, and then there was a big push to save them, but of course so much money had been lost that they decided to abandon the line. This trolley, as you see, is coming down. It's heading south down 150th Street. He would go over where the Cross Island Parkway is today and continue all the way to Northern Boulevard, make a right, and head down to the intersection of Main Street and make a left and head south towards Jamaica. And then other trolleys on that same line, instead of heading south down Main Street towards Jamaica, would keep heading down Northern Boulevard over the Flushing River and heading towards Corona, Astoria, and Long Island City. Interesting to point out, once the trolley lines were abandoned, they were replaced by buses. So a lot of the buses, like the Q15 and the Q14, followed the old route of the trolley. This is another great photo. This is looking down 14th. This is looking in the direction of where we are today. Where we are would be right here, where this tree is. This is now the animal hospital, which is right now.